Hello and welcome to the Chasing Flags F1 podcast. My name's Liv and I've been a fan of F1 for about 3 years. And I figured why not, even though it's halfway through the season, start talking about it because to be honest, I love debating about the things that go on in all the races with people. On Twitter, I like watching people's opinions on things, especially if they're fans of like certain teams like Mercedes and Ferrari, how they view things very differently. I figured why not give it a shot myself. Today we're going to be reviewing the British Grand Prix because that was very eventful. I guess that's like the shortest term that you could come up with, eventful. It doesn't accurately describe the absolute chaos of what it was, but it was probably one of the best Grand Prix I've ever seen in my short time of watching F1. Just absolutely fun, crazy stuff going on. So let's dive into how the weekend kind of unfolded. So first, of course, was qualifying, and nothing screams unpredictable more than wet qualifying. Seriously, I was super excited when I found out it was going to be raining. I actually had the morning off, so I was able to watch it, and boy, it did not disappoint. We had some shockers. We had the normal guys kind of go out. So Q1, I think it was Vettel, Stroll, Albon. And then the two Haas's, I'm pretty sure, were eliminated in Q1. And then we had Nicholas Latifi making it into Q2. And that was just weird. I would kind of expect Albon to make it through. But Nicky just pulled it out of nowhere and made it through. And apparently his car was older because Alex got all the upgrades for the weekend and he still managed to beat Alex and get into Q2, I think for the first time this season. And then we go into Q2. Daniel went out at the wrong time, I feel, didn't really get a good lap in and was eliminated in Q2. I honestly kind of forgot who else was eliminated in Q2 because I was just so shocked by the fact that Nicholas Latifi made it into Q3. Like, if you already think that Nicholas Latifi making it into Q2 is just like a mind boggler, then watching him manage to scrape his way into Q3 is even weirder. But I was all for it. I was like, man, this guy has just been hiding this from all of us. His capabilities, this feels weird. And then we go into Q3 and it gets even crazier because you have a lot of guys going out around the same time because they know the rain is kind of coming down worse because it stops, it comes back, stops, it comes back, and then it just comes back and it just gets way wetter, way worse. And you have Charles Leclerc, I think he spun or something in qualifying, wasn't able to really put in the lap that he probably wanted to, but he still did enough to get Q3. You have Max on his final lap. He was not able to get pole, which was probably the most surprising thing about all of it. You have Lando qualifying, I think it was P5, which, that's pretty good. For all of the struggles that we've been having lately, that was nice to see, especially at his and the team's home race and the way that Daniel qualified. It was good to see that we could take something positive from Saturday and try to translate it into something good for Sunday. And then we have, of course, our pole sitter. And boy, was this a long time coming. And I was so excited when it happened that Carlos Sainz finally got pole. I feel like he's just been waiting and he works so hard. So finally he managed to edge Verstappen out for pole. I loved it. The crowd loved it. They were just cheering. I could hear it on my TV over the commentators. They were excited too. It was just interesting to see somebody else that's not Leclerc, that's not Verstappen, that's not even Hamilton either, because last year it was just pretty much Mercedes and Red Bull on pole all the time, except for I think the 2 times that Leclerc was able to get pole.
Lando Norris crosses the line. Lando Norris is on pole for the first time in his Formula One career.
And it's just nice to see a newer driver on pole compared to the ones that we're normally used to. It was exciting to see how Ferrari would either do really well with this position or mess it up. As we delve into what happens throughout the Grand Prix, we obviously know kind of how that went for Ferrari, but it had some strong hopes going into Sunday. And then we get to Sunday, everything seems totally fine. Race gets started, and then Absolute mayhem, lap 1. George crashes into Zhou. Zhou's car flips upside down. Everybody's probably seen it by now. If you haven't, it was one of the most terrifying things I've ever seen. His car flips upside down, and it scrapes across the track, and then it just goes down into the gravel, still upside down, and then right before it hits the barrier, it flips over the barrier and hits the fence and then lands upside down in the gap between this fence and the barrier. And it was honestly, just terrifying. I can't even imagine just being there. I didn't really know what happened because after it happened, they cut away so quickly that, they weren't going to show anything, especially if it was like something bad, which thankfully in the end it wasn't as bad as it could have been. If it was going to be something potentially bad, they weren't going to show it, and they didn't show any replays until they got the go-ahead that he was alright in there. And thank God that Zhou's okay. I'm just glad that the way that the cars are designed now, that he was able to just make it out of there. And I know that there was an issue with I think it's called the roll hoop, which is like this little thing that sits on top of the car, almost like a pair of like giant binoculars on top. But it's to prevent the car from basically crushing a driver in the event that they flip upside down. And it fell off, or like it broke off, I should say, as it was scraping across the ground for what felt like ages it was. And that's potentially dangerous. I know a lot of people are saying that that's very much an engineering design failure from Alfa Romeo. At the same time, it's kind of like very unexpected that happened, but maybe it just happened from the sheer speed that he was kind of flying upside down across the track and the gravel, that it kind of broke off. But it should definitely be stronger. After this incident, we had 3 cars out. Having 3 cars out, pretty much that first corner, shortens up the field. We had the red flag. It took about, I think, an hour for them to clean everything up, and everybody's just kind of waiting for the news that Zhou was going to be okay, which we finally got, and we were all just like, thank goodness. And we hear that Alex Albon had to go to the hospital to get some preliminary checks, which thank God that he was okay too, because I didn't even know that it was that bad for him. It didn't look too awful, but I know that, getting crashed into out of nowhere is probably more painful than one would think just looking at the onboard. I'm kind of just grateful that everybody was okay. You never like to see these types of things, and then especially just how just brutal it all looked. It was terrifying, and I'm just glad that the fence that was there, that was protecting the grandstand, was high enough, because that was really close to just being a freaking disaster. So before we get into the restart, there's something I want to talk about that maybe not a lot of people know. I'm pretty sure most people know by now. There was also some other crazy shit going on, where these protesters, dressed as marshals, snuck onto the track and then just kind of sat there across the grid. And I'm like, what? What are they doing? So they didn't show this during the live feed. Like, I was just scrolling on Twitter, so I was trying to see if everybody was okay, because typically people that are in that section of the crash would probably take videos or post stuff or tweet stuff being like, oh, I'm here, this person's okay, or they're still getting them out, or just posting what happened. So I was kind of trying to see if everybody was okay and what was going on, since they weren't showing it on TV. And then I found out about these marshals, or fake marshals, that were breaking the law and trespassing for protesting. And I think it was a protest about oil. I'm not really sure. I didn't look up too much onto what they were protesting. But what I do know is that is probably the worst place you could have chosen to protest. Because a lot of people that were defending the actions of these protesters were saying that they were just trying to cause disruption and they were trying to peacefully protest. But in my mind, I just keep thinking of what would have happened had there not had been that crash and that red flag. These cars are probably the fastest cars on this planet. They go between 160 to 200 and something miles an hour. And having people just sit on the grid is a terrible idea. It is terrible. It is awful. Because the amount of time that it takes for a message to go from race control that would notice this to the teams, and then from the teams to the drivers, it could have been like not enough time for them to slow it down. or if they have to do an abrupt stop or slide out of the way to prevent hitting these people, who's to say the drivers like literally right behind them wouldn't know to stop in time? Or for people that want to say that it was peaceful, it's not peaceful if you're either getting yourselves killed or hurting the drivers or potentially getting them killed because they have to take avoiding action. These cars go around this track in about a minute and a half, and that is not enough time for them to get out of the way if they don't notice you in time because they are going way too fast. Yeah, it's kind of like a weird thing that they would do this, and in my mind it's kind of like how to not protest 101. I think it was a terrible place to try and do it, and a terrible event because, you know, F1's one of the most, I guess, like, aware of how their cars affect the environment, and their goal to be carbon neutral is something that is coming to fruition. You know, they're working on this carbon net or carbon neutral fuel by 2026, which would help them, you know, lower emissions throughout the world, which will be really nice. And then just from their development and their R&D research, it really helps tons of industries throughout the world. So, you know, they're leading in like climate change and like racing and motorsports and just in general. They do a lot of good things, even though they are very, I guess, you know, bad for the environment in terms of like they're racing, they are hybrid vehicles, they're technically better than a lot of the different cars out there. In the way that they race and how they plan their events, they try to make it as efficient as possible. I think protesting there is kind of a weird place to pick because they're very aware and are actively trying to solve things and create change. But I know a lot of people on Twitter I was seeing, they were saying that it's not about F1. They're not protesting F1. They're just protesting oil. But it's like, maybe pick a better place to do that. And other people that are defending this are saying that, like, well, in order to, you know, raise awareness for a cause, you have to kind of do something that people would notice. I just feel like in my mind, there are way better ways to go about it than to do something like that. And to really put people at risk, because not only are they putting their own lives at risk and the lives of the drivers, they could potentially traumatize these drivers if they end up surviving any crash, if they happen to hurt somebody or kill somebody that decided to do this, and then could freaking traumatize the audience that is watching this live on TV, or the people that are watching it in person, which would be probably even more horrifying. This is not a joke. In some way, that lap 1 incident was like a blessing in disguise, and it kind of sucks, right? Because you never want to see something like that happen, but I feel like it could have been even worse had they kept going, right? And they had crashed into these people. I don't know. It's kind of like a weird balancing act of like, how shit would it be either way? It's horrible, but I'm just glad that everybody was okay, that the authorities were able to arrest these people, because yeah, breaking the law is not cool, and especially putting yourself in very dangerous situations in motorsports is even worse. Let's go back to the Grand Prix. So we go to the race restart, and the race restart was kind of weird because the way that they first explained how it was going to go was kind of confusing. And then finally they explained it in a way better way, and I was like, oh, okay. So apparently they did not hit the safety car like sector that would have been needed to continue in the way that they were already following the red flag. So like when the red flag hit, Max was in the lead, and I was super excited because Daniel was in P10, and I know how much he's been struggling. So the fact that he went from P14 to P10 in like one corner, or you know, however long it took, was exciting. And then they were like, actually, since they didn't get to this point on the track before the red flag came out, we're gonna reset the grid essentially, and we're gonna start in these positions going forward. They put Carlos back on pole, they put Max back in P2, and they kind of, I think they shuffled things around a little bit because obviously you had the DNFs, so there's not going to be the guys in like the same places as they were. In the restart, you know, you have Carlos kind of just taking off and being able to defend against Max, which was exciting to see because I really really wanted Carlos to win. Like, I know Carlos is not a part of McLaren anymore, but to me, that doesn't matter, you know? He's such a nice guy, and I feel like he just works so hard that he deserves a chance to actually fight on his own for a race win without anything kind of disrupting that. At this point, you know, that's kind of how it was going. He was fighting off Verstappen, he was trying to build a lead, and then, you know, we have Daniel moving up again. We have some more DNFs coming on later in the race. You know, we have Pierre Gasly having to retire, Valtteri Bottas having to retire. We have Lando in P5, which was nice. And then eventually you have Max having to drop back. So he overtakes Sainz, and then he has to drop back like 2 laps later because he has some damage with his car. So like earlier, Carlos and Max battling for P1. And then you have Charles and Sergio battling for P3. So Sergio and Leclerc make contact. Sergio has to pit, goes down the order until I think he's last place. Leclerc has like minor front wing damage. Apparently he lost like 5 points of downforce or something like that. But it didn't really show. He just had like really good pace. Max gets a piece of the AlphaTauri car stuck underneath his car. And I don't know when this happened, per se, like the exact point that he hit this debris, but I know that the AlphaTauris were doing pretty good. I think they were in the points, and then they tapped each other, and they both spun in like this synchronized spin, and they both dropped out of the points. So I'm like, maybe when they touched and they spun, they left some debris on the track that nobody really noticed, and then Max comes along, and he just sucks it up under his car, and it honestly compromises his race. You know, he has to slow down, he has to come in, he tries to get new tires, and he's kind of just confused of what's going on. He says like the car is like basically undrivable, it's awful. He has a great drive, a great recovery drive. He manages to secure P7 in the end, but the fact that he dropped down so low from where we expected because of these issues, it should have given Ferrari the opportunity to capitalize. And capitalize they did and did not at the same time. So Carlos and Charles end up P1 and P2 with Lewis Hamilton behind them and catching. Charles obviously has better pace but is stuck behind Carlos, and so they keep telling him over the radio, you gotta do like this lap time. If you can't do that, we're gonna let Charles pass you. It takes laps for them to actually finally switch them around. Leclerc finally overtakes Sainz, and then Esteban Ocon retires, and that throws like a big winch in Ferrari's plan. So they're still running P1 and P2, I'm pretty sure. They have Hamilton gaining on them. They decide to pit Carlos and not Charles. And a lot of people are giving them shit about this decision. To be honest, it doesn't make sense to me. I kind of get it, but I kind of don't. Like, I get you're the leader, you pit. That gives people the opportunity to decide what they want to do following your decision. But I feel like the smartest thing to do would have been to go on softs with Charles if they wanted Charles to win the race, or to double stack. Double stacking wasn't an option because there wasn't enough time to prepare for that, or that's what Ferrari said. So they decided to pit their secondary car, which was Carlos at the time. When they finally go green, you have everybody except Charles on brand new softs, which is like your worst nightmare. And so they ask Carlos, they're like, hey, can you build up a gap of 10 car lengths to Charles? And he's like, no. Some people are criticizing Sainz for saying no and defying team orders. I don't blame him at all for doing so. I mean, if you think about it, you want to win this race. You were on pole for the race. You were leading for a decent amount of the race. And your team pits you and puts you on first softs with the chance to win. What are you gonna do? I'm gonna try to win. Because at the end of the day, yeah, they're a team, but they're also competitors. They're all trying to win the same prize, you know? The same trophy, the same championship. I think that if I can still get decent points for the team, I'm going to do what I need to do and not compromise my race for the team. Because I feel like trying to slow down Carlos on softs would have just screwed them both over and screwed them both out of positions. I don't know. I don't think Carlos could have kept it at like the optimal speed to kind of defend for both of them and not just for Charles. So I think he did what he had to do. He kind of blows by Leclerc on the restart. Charles is struggling against Sergio, who managed to pit under the safety car and make up some positions, which, I mean, good for him. That was perfectly timed for him. And then Lewis, who wants to obviously get a podium at his home race. That would be cool. The three of them are battling, and I am like on the edge of my seat watching this. So much fun to watch that and to actually see the close battles, because at one point it's like 5 cars trying to battle for P2. And that is just so cool, because like last year I felt like it was way harder for teams to kind of stay in a fight. Eventually people just started breaking away, and it was like these large gaps that felt very insurmountable to catch up to the next guy. And it kind of just felt like sometimes it was like where you were is where you were stuck, unless you capitalized at the beginning of the race, or, you know, under a safety car from time to time. But now, you know, we have much closer racing, and I think that on that aspect F1 has definitely succeeded, because that was a thriller. You know, I was really hoping that Lando would be able to catch Fernando at the end, but he wasn't able to because they pit him at the wrong time and Fernando was able to get the edge on him. Leclerc was fighting back against Hamilton and Perez, and it was kind of like back and forth, but finally Sergio starts to build a gap to try and chase after Carlos, although it was too much of a gap for him to catch up to. And then Lewis manages to get the job finally done and overtakes Charles for P3, and Carlos manages to win his first race in F1, and it took him 150 races to do so. But congratulations to Carlos. You know, my live reaction, I don't know, I was very emotional, very pumped up too. My brain was kind of deciding whether it wanted to cry or just scream in excitement. I kind of chose to scream in excitement and then cry later in the day. But it was really nice to see a good guy get the win finally. You know, I feel like it's just been waiting and waiting ever since his McLaren days. You know, he was so close in 2020 to winning at Monza, but it just didn't happen. And last year had some good opportunities to win, didn't happen. This year has had opportunities to win, especially last week in Canada, wasn't able to do it, but finally he did it. And he got that under his belt. I think it's a beautiful weight off his shoulder. Fantastic drive for him. But Ferrari shit the bed. I think had they been quicker to react early on in the race, and then later after the safety car came out, I think they could have potentially had a 1-2 or at least a 1-3, but they kind of messed that up and they allowed others to capitalize on their kind of indecisiveness. And I think that if they really want to be strong competitors, that they need to just like make decisions on the fly and stick with them, because I think their fear is that they're gonna fall behind if they make the wrong decision instead of taking gambles. Like Red Bull and Mercedes, especially last year, they weren't always scared to take a gamble. You know, there were times that they were just like, screw it, let's just go for it. You know, what's the worst that can happen? And they kind of just say F it. And that's kind of how you have to be when you're in contention for a championship. Not only for a driver's championship, but for a constructors, kinda. But you know, this should have been a weekend where they capitalized on it, and they did not. So we'll kind of see how that goes moving forward. It's gonna be interesting to see who they prioritize going forward as well, because a lot of people are saying that Charles has the better pace and I guess the stronger desire to be a champion in this moment, especially with the races that we've seen so far this season that he's done well in, where their strategies have been on point. But I think that now that Carlos is kind of closing the gap on Charles and, you know, he's catching up, I think that it'll be interesting to see who they decide is going to be their number 1 and number 2, you know, because, I mean, Carlos already has, I think, half the amount of wins that Charles does. They're almost neck and neck, so that's kind of weird to see. But yeah, the British Grand Prix was definitely very interesting to see. Some other bonus things I want to talk about. Let's talk about Haas. Haas finally gets double points in, I think it was quite a few years, like 3 years maybe? I think it was 2019, I'm not 100% sure. Mick Schumacher finally scores his first points in F1. And now he's like ahead of Albon. And I think Stroll in the Drivers' Championship because he has one more point than both of them. I think he scored 4 points. And I was on the edge of my seat. So he was battling Verstappen for 7th place. And you have Sebastian Vettel right behind him. Although he kind of got distracted by watching this. I think Mick did a really good job. It really reminded me of Hungary last year, and kind of this whole weekend did, because you have a surprise winner, you have a first time winner, you have crazy crashes, safety cars, interesting strategies, mega pace from Hamilton, kind of all these different things, and finally Mick's able to get it done and get some points, and that was good for him. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a confidence boost for Haas. I was just hoping and praying the whole race that they would not notice, the announcers would not notice that Mick was in the points, because every time they do, they talk about it. They're like, right now he's in a points position, and then somehow, some way, he just gets jinxed, and then Mick gets out of the points, whether it's crashing, retirement, whatever, out of the points. And finally, nobody talked about him, was in the points, and I was like, thank goodness. Although I kind of felt like his points were a little bit overshadowed by everything else that was going on. Still, congrats to him. He's got that under his belt. I think his family was there to watch him. Really cool moment for him for sure. But yeah, I don't know. I felt like this was like really good. It was very dramatic, and I think it showcased how interesting these 22 cars are. They're kind of slower in a way. Like, they look like they're slower, but they're still fast, obviously. They are bulkier, especially with the big wheels, but they make racing more exciting. And I think with like tweaks to the regulations over the next few years to really change things around for the better. I think this is what we need. We need to see 5, 10, or all 10 different teams fighting for points every race. The fact that every team has scored so far this season compared to last season, where you had teams that didn't score any points at all or very low points, that's just fun to see, and it's great. So yeah, interesting race weekend. I'm excited to see what happens in Austria, because Austria is always a blast. Hoping Lando can get podium 3 of 3 in Austria, because he's gotten one in the last 2 years, and that Daniel can do well. I think it's a sprint weekend too, which I love the sprints. I think they bring something very interesting. I hope that it's only like every once in a while they do sprints, because I think next year they're voting to move it up to 6 races that they're gonna have sprints. But I think they do bring in some extra edge to the race weekend. It's always fun to watch and very exciting. So you never know what's gonna happen. But yeah, looking forward to that. Let me know down below what your thoughts were on the race weekend. How did you guys like Silverstone? Did you think it was as crazy as I did? What drivers do you want to see do well in Austria? And what do you think about Ferrari's strategy? What do you think they need to do in order to be better and really take the fight to Red Bull? Because right now, it kind of seems that they're falling a bit behind. Be sure to tweet at me at Chasing Flags or at True Genre Sports your opinions on these races, or comment them down below in this YouTube video. I hope you guys have a wonderful day and enjoy your weekend like I will. I'll see you guys in the next episode.